Welcome to the first episode of AI War Forecast. It is January 2026, and the world has entered a year defined not by calm transitions, but by strategic shocks. This channel exists to answer one question, clearly, consistently, and without panic. How close are we to World War III? Not through ideology, not through headlines, and not through fear. AI War Forecast is about signals, not slogans. Each episode examines a real geopolitical event and evaluates how it changes the global escalation landscape, whether it raises risk, lowers it, or quietly shifts the rules that govern power. Today's episode focuses on the defining flashpoint of the new year, the recent U.S. military operation inside Venezuela, carried out by the United States. Some view this action as law enforcement, some see it as liberation, others see it as a dangerous breach of international norms. Those debates matter, but they are not our starting point. World wars do not begin because one side is right and the other is wrong. They begin when thresholds move, when precedents are set, and when multiple actors recalibrate what they believe is now acceptable. This episode will not tell you what to think, it will tell you what changed. We will walk through what happened, why the United States says it acted, why critics are alarmed, and, most importantly, what this event signals about the stability of the global system. At the end, we will assign a World War III risk score on a transparent scale and explain exactly how we arrived at that number. Let's begin with the facts. On January 3, 2026, the United States launched a rapid, coordinated military operation inside Venezuela. The mission was officially titled Operation Absolute Resolve. In the early hours of the morning, U.S. forces conducted a short but intense sequence of actions. Cyber and electronic operations disrupted communications, precision strikes degraded air defenses, and special operations units moved on a fixed location in Caracas. Within hours, Venezuela's sitting president was taken into U.S. custody and removed from the country. There was no prolonged bombardment, there was no declared occupation, and there was no immediate attempt to dismantle the Venezuelan state itself. Instead, the operation ended as abruptly as it began. What followed is just as important as the raid. Rather than installing an opposition figure or dissolving the existing government, Venezuela's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, was sworn in as acting president under Venezuela's constitutional process. The ruling party remained intact. The military stayed largely in place. At the same time, 56 political prisoners were released inside Venezuela, an action the U.S. later cited as a factor in holding back a planned second wave of strikes. During the operation, Cuban personnel defending the compound were killed, and Russia and China immediately condemned the action as the kidnapping of a head of state. From a tactical standpoint, the mission succeeded. From a strategic standpoint, something larger occurred. A major power demonstrated it was willing to use direct force inside another sovereign nation to remove a leader while stopping short of full regime change. That hybrid outcome is the key signal. And to understand why it matters, we need to examine why the United States says it acted in the first place. The United States has offered a clear, consistent justification for Operation Absolute Resolve. According to the administration of Donald Trump, the operation was not framed as a war, but as a law enforcement action supported by military force. The central claim is that Venezuela had become a narco-state, and that its leader was directly involved in large-scale drug trafficking that posed a national security threat to Americans. Federal indictments, terrorism designations, and prior counter-narcotics operations were cited as the legal foundation. In this framing, the raid was described as the execution of an arrest warrant, not regime change. The second pillar of justification was constitutional authority. The White House argued that the president holds inherent power to act swiftly against transnational criminal threats without prior congressional authorization, particularly when the operation is limited in scope and duration. Third, there was a humanitarian and political argument. U.S. officials described Venezuela's government as illegitimate, repressive, and responsible for widespread suffering. Removing its leader, they argued, would open space for political stabilization while avoiding the chaos of a full occupation. Supporters of the operation point to what did not happen. No prolonged bombing campaign, no American occupation force, no immediate collapse of the Venezuelan state. They argue this was decisive but restrained force, designed to deter future threats rather than ignite a wider conflict. From this perspective, the signal sent was not recklessness, but control, that the United States can act unilaterally, surgically, and then disengage. But international systems do not judge actions by intent alone. They judge them by precedent, and that is where the criticism and the escalation risk enters the picture. Critics of Operation Absolute Resolve focus less on the target and more on the precedent. From this perspective, the central issue is not whether Venezuela's former leader was corrupt or abusive. It is whether a powerful state can now normalize the use of military force to remove foreign leaders under the banner of law enforcement. International law scholars and many governments argue that the operation violated core principles of sovereignty and non-intervention. There was no authorization from the United Nations, and no claim of immediate self-defense. That matters because global stability relies less on trust and more on predictable restraint. Critics warn that if this model is accepted, other powers will adapt it. If one country can justify abducting a head of state as criminal enforcement, others may follow, against leaders they label illegitimate, corrupt, or dangerous. This concern is especially acute in capitals like China and Russia, both of which condemned the operation and described it as a kidnapping. During the raid, Cuban personnel were killed defending the compound in Caracas, adding a direct proxy dimension to the event. Domestically, critics also point to executive overreach. Congress was bypassed, war powers were stretched, a precedent was set that future presidents of either party could invoke. There is also skepticism about motive. Opponents argue that strategic interests, oil, regional dominance, and signaling strength, were as important as law enforcement or humanitarian concerns. They warn that blending criminal justice with military force blurs lines that once constrained escalation. In short, critics do not argue this event caused instability. They argue it redefined what instability now looks like. And that brings us to the final question. How much does this actually move the world closer to a wider war? We end every episode of AI War Forecast with a World War III risk score. This is not a prediction, it is a systemic risk assessment, a measure of how close the global system is to an uncontrollable great power conflict. The scale runs from 1 to 10. 1 represents background tension. 10 represents an active, multi-theater great power war. Based on Operation Absolute Resolve, today's score is 5.5 out of 10. Here's why. This event raises risk because a major power crossed a sovereignty threshold. A sitting head of state was removed by force without multilateral authorization. That weakens restraints other powers have relied on to judge what actions are now acceptable. There is also a clear escalation signal. The administration publicly acknowledged that a second, larger strike package was prepared, and then held back. That matters. It indicates willingness to escalate further if conditions change. At the same time, this does not push the system into the 7 or 8 range. There was no direct clash between great powers. China and Russia responded rhetorically, not militarily. Alliance structures held. Global markets absorbed the shock. The hybrid outcome inside Venezuela also matters. Removing the leader without dismantling the ruling party suggests a strategy focused on leverage and stability rather than total regime collapse, reducing immediate spillover risk. One wildcard bears watching: energy. The United States has signaled intent to oversee and rebuild Venezuela's oil sector. Reactions from OPEC Plus and energy markets could amplify pressure quickly, nudging this score higher. The core takeaway is this: Venezuela itself is not the danger, the precedent is. This event did not start World War III, but it lowered the threshold for how one could start, somewhere else under different conditions. In the next episode, we'll track whether this score moves up, down, or holds. This is AI War Forecast.